I have the honor, I have two honors. One is the honor that I say every day of serving as the campus provost and executive vice chancellor at UC Santa Cruz. And the second is the honor of being together up here on the stage as we offer the closing panel. Now, I'm going to say that as I first thought of my responsibility today, and that was really weeks ago, I said, this is good. This is good. We're going to find something that's, we're going to have a lot to talk about. And I do think we're going to have a lot to talk about. I also want to say to my panelists that we have a rather challenging remit, right? The state of the global economy, right, as the closing panel. Now, there's, I think, much that we could say, given the strengths of our country's economies, right? Given the strengths of the U.S. economy and the Indian economy, and our theme even for this afternoon, right? Trade, tech, trust. I think we're going to ride hard on some of these elements as we try to take a step, maybe it's a step back, it's very likely a step up, and try to draw some reflections and perspectives about the state of the global economy. I want to repeat one sentence from the paragraph that describes this panel in our program. And that sentence was the closing sentence of the paragraph. Sustaining a resurgence in global economic growth requires the world to reset priorities and find ways to do business despite differences. There's been a lot of talk this afternoon about a world that is not just growing apart, but that has grown apart, has different centers of power and control and influence and malfeasance, right, as well, right? And I have shared a set of questions with the panelists in advance. I'm probably likely to surprise you a bit in the order. Here's what, before I introduce the panel, here's what I'd like to say to my panelists is that I'd really like us to talk with each other, right? That there may be a general question that I ask all of you, and then as we proceed down you can also agree with or argue back. I put all my cards on arguing back, right, with each other in order to have a conversation. Right, thank you. In order to have a conversation.
Lori, when is the reception?
Well, we'll just get people warmed up for the reception, I think, right? That's what we'll do. So I am, my third honor is the honor of sitting up here with my very distinguished panelists. So I just want to introduce, there are many of us up here, but I will say at least there is a woman sitting up here in this closing panel. So thank you very much for that. And I'm delighted to be here. So I'm sitting up here with Sanjay Kirloskar, Pramod Basin, Navneet Kug, Sharad Singh, and my distinguished colleague, who I believe now, Nirvikar, we have known each other for 44 years from graduate school. We have not been doing our jobs for 44 years, but close, but very close. Nirvikar Singh, who's a distinguished professor of economics at Santa Cruz. So here's the question. Here's the question that I want to ask. And it's very open-ended, what paths do you see, and Sharad, I'm going to start with you. You probably won't ever talk to me again after having said that to you.
It's fine. I'm the least experienced and the least prepared today, so I got nothing to lose.
It's okay. No. Very much. You are very much prepared. What paths do you see for sustaining a resurgence in global economic growth? Like, what are the... I would even put a finer twist on that. What are the positive paths that you see for it? But also I want to open this up to what are the challenges you see to that as well?
Well, I think the obvious positive is the automation and AI that's building out. I think we're going to have a huge surge in productivity. It is also I'm 41, my biggest fear about humanity is like, what are people going to do when they get displaced with work? I think, my whole life has been built on just connecting with people and I always say I'm not very bright, but I'm very nice, and I like to talk to people and connect with them. I think we're losing that. That's a big fear I have. So hopefully, if machines start doing more things for us, maybe we start talking to more humans again and connecting with them. So maybe that's somewhere in there we start interacting more with each other because we get fed up with the machines.
All right. Pramod, can I ask you to comment on this? What paths do you see and elements of optimism or worries that come from the pessimistic side on a resurgence in global economic growth?
I have a slightly longer answer if I'm allowed.
Please.
Yeah. So I think actually the world economy is doing just fine. It's world politics which is a complete disaster. Okay. In fact, if you look at the American economy, the Indian economy, and I think the Chinese economy will bounce back with the latest stimulus that they've got, even though I think most of the world loves talking about the demise of China. They've been talking about this for 50 years, and I haven't seen it going down yet. So it's doing okay. So I think major parts of the world are doing fine. UK isn't, and pockets aren't, right? But major parts of the world, Scandinavia, etc., are doing fine. So one, I think, the question is more, how do we solve for this wretched state of politics that we're in right now, which is the most fragile that I certainly am aware of in my lifetime at this point in time. It feels like you're ice skating on very smoothly, very nicely, but you realize that the ice below you is extremely fragile and can give way any time. So the economy is doing fine, but these warts, etc., could break apart. So I think that's one element which we have a lot of. There was a great phrase used, and I'm not referring to any particular leader here, please, even though some of them are, get into the area of weird. I'm not talking about any particular leader. But nowadays you have a lot of strong, petty-minded leaders. Leadership seems to have disappeared from this world, in the political world. We don't have really leaders of astounding inspiration, admiration, qualities, big thinkers, big philosophers, big people who can change people's minds and views. I don't know where they've all gone. I don't know I don't know if they've retired to the universities or decided to go into other areas, but they ain't in politics as far as I can tell. So that's one big area. I do think if we can rebuild trust, and I'm hoping at some point in time populations of this world realize that we need better leadership than what we are being destined to right now, that the ability to build trust will change things. I mean, there's enormous opportunities out there. One of the principal ones, which I'm very excited about, by the way, which I think many parts of the world will not be excited about, is actually this whole area of global mobility, and that's just something that is happening. The developed world is going to be short of like 30 to 50 million jobs. And I'm very excited because the only country that can provide them is India. So I think there's a huge opportunity out here for building those kinds of corridors. And this will apply across the world. And as we open up, if we can open up to these kinds of corridors, I think it can fuel growth. AI will fuel growth, although on productivity, I must tell you, technology has not led to higher productivity in the past. It's led to a lot of personal improvement. So we spend a lot more time on things on our phone. I'm not sure any of it is necessarily terribly productive. Even a lot of the AI help desk that you get, etc., on your phones and other places are really helping you do a lot more administrative things even better. It's really terrific. But so we'll see when productivity kicks in. And then the last one I would just say is that the startup world is exciting for the world and if we can connect startups much better with each other across the world, as to the extent we can, India, USA, India, UK, Scandinavia, to other parts of the world, the startup world has enormous potential, and it's exciting the whole world. I've just come back from Norway and Finland and Sweden, and boom, it's taking off. Everybody's talking about startups, and I think that's a movement across the country, across the world, which I find extremely encouraging and inspiring. God help us with the politics of today's world. which is taking us into areas I fear for all of us.
Pramod, how many jobs have you created in life? About 100,000 or 200? Tell me.
Well, we started an industry which now employs 4 million people.
Okay.
So I think,
So in your country, which used to be mine as well, 1.4 billion people, the most populous country in the world, 900 million people are of working age. 60 million have formal employment. We don't know what's going on with the other 840 million. What's going on?
actually, we do know. We don't know what's going on probably with, well, firstly, if you dissect that number, you take away the older people, you take away the people under 15, you take away people who are already employed.
That's done. That's how we get to 900 million from 1.4 billion.
Not really, actually. Anyway, I'll dispute this number. So the number is much smaller than that. But it's still huge, to your point. We know where they're going, by the way. There is now much more data being collected on informal networks, informal jobs, where are people headed, what kind of work they're going. You know, a lot of them go into SMEs, MSMEs, which are just not counted or not registered. So we have a massive unemployment problem in India, which still exists. And yet, at the same time, you know, the growth rate of the country is exceptional. And will continue to do that. There is no, by the way, there's one thing I would say to everyone, including you know, people here. There is no shortcut to the creation of jobs. No country has demonstrated that, right? Except China. Except China. I go back to China. So I think that, unfortunately, with tragic consequences, is a problem we're going to have to live with for a period of time. Because I don't know of any way in which you create, you know, to your point, 300-400 million jobs that quickly. I know Sanjay will have a lot to say about this because he's an industrial, and I'll stop at this time.
Go ahead, and then Nirvikar, you absolutely looked like you had something to say there. But Navneet, let me not pass right over you, because you too had something to say.
Sorry, so it's Navneet's turn or mine?
Well, Navneet, did you feel as if you'd taken a turn there?
Sure.
He has a lot to say.
I know, I know.
Will I
Well,
get
it will
another-
come back to you.
Will I
so-
get another turn today, or should I leave?
No, you will, well, depending on how long you take this time, you will get another turn today.
So your question, Laurie, is about how could we keep growing. And I think it's helpful to look at it from a historical perspective, in the sense that the world order, as we've become familiar with it, is a product of the Second World War, which was absolutely cataclysmic in terms of its impacts. And in some sense, everything wasn't solved, right? In the sense that there was this divide between the West and the Soviets. So in some sense, we're sort of figuring that out. And I think to answer your question, the obvious first answer is that one needs to manage conflict and reduce conflict. And to do that is a lot of hard work. And I think after 1991 and the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a degree of complacency about how easy it would be to manage the new world order. So I think it's not just bad leadership, but I think everybody just has to work harder to manage these things. We see the impacts of you know, you can sort of trace the impacts of conflict. For example, the conflict in Syria led to a massive influx of refugees into Europe, which you know, creates the conditions for right-wing populism and so on. So I think all of these things have to be looked at. So to go back to Pramod's point, politics is part of the problem, but politics and economics are also connected. And one of the issues that I think hasn't perhaps been surfaced, and it's something that I think you've looked at indirectly, is inequality. Mm-hmm. Because when you have periods of rapid change, people get displaced from their jobs and inequality increases. And we see that in the United States. And you know, global inequality has reduced with the rise of China, but that's cold comfort to the person who loses their job in the United States. So I think these issues have to be kind of thought of holistically. And the other aspect, of course, for thinking about, how are we going to grow economically, it's always going to come back to climate change, because that's the existential threat. Maybe nuclear war is also an existential threat. But climate change really is an opportunity as well, because it offers a chance to make new kinds of investments, and I think so that dealing, in some sense, dealing with climate change, I think, is the magic bullet for growing. Otherwise, we're all going to die anyway.
Sanjay.
Yeah, being last, what I was going to talk about was sustainability.
Good.
And I walked into this building and I saw that it's a gold-rated building. And I said to Vineet, who's no longer here, I said, in California, only gold-rated. My office in Pune is platinum-rated. So, but that is a huge opportunity that I see, because, we have to move away from coal-fired power plants, fossil fuel-based power plants. And I think in India also we are seeing that opportunity. Solar power generation is going up in a big way. Wind is not so much because we don't have that much wind. Nuclear, India is very slow, though I'm very interested in nuclear power. But, the problem with green jobs in places like India, where it could be very economical to make things, is, or we are going to be forced to change, is what Europe and America have done. The European Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is basically to keep jobs in Europe. And the Inflation Reduction Act is, again, to keep jobs over here. So, one of the points is, how do we grow together? And your point about politics, petty politicians. I mean, I've been in business long enough where Americans would say, do it in the most efficient manner. And now you have the US government trying to protect, and you had Secretary of Commerce of the US come to India and say, open up, we can do things far cheaper, we can give you stuff in a far better way. But nowadays it looks like the US doesn't want that. So how do we grow together? Because that was one of the questions that you asked. And one of the things that my company has done for getting over this is we are in every trading block, right? We want to ensure that we meet localization or local value-added norms. But, as long as the politicians are going to keep changing the games that they're playing, we are not going to be able to grow as fast as we would like.
It's true, when the rules change.
Your question about employment in India, I don't think manufacturing is going to create the jobs. Industrialization is not going to create. The time is over. I mean, China must have done it. We could have done it then. The company that I run had more people for 1/30th the turnover when I joined. So it's going to be difficult to employ so many people now, especially with the latest tools that are coming out. And the problem for us in industry is that now there is global competition, right? You have to be able to do, provide quality, cost, consistently, reliably. And then you have to have the latest tools, which may or may not be available in your own country. And there is no other way to compete but to have the latest technologies. And then, you end up having having a factory in India, which is like a factory over here. And the sad part is, if you have people, you have ERE costs, which keep on rising every year. And with technology and with the latest machines, you can depreciate them, right? And that problem is over. Until you need to buy a new machine, which may be 5 times the cost.
Exactly, until you need to buy a new
machine.
machine.
That's the only way to stay in business. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's funny how we put legislation that we were breaking and polluting and everything to hold other countries down. I always find that interesting that that legislation comes out for other countries, other developing countries. But I think we talk about politics a lot. I think politics, yes, politicians are terrible. Both sides suck. We all agree. But I think information is a big problem right now. We cannot agree on anything around this world. We cannot agree locally on politics. We cannot agree, not even politics, policy. We cannot agree on, is climate change real in this country? That is, I think, the biggest issue right now is misinformation. And I think you were saying that there's a lack of philosophers and lack of really talented people that are thinking outside the box. I think they are there. I loved, from both sides, I loved candidates that are not running for president right now. There were great people there that got 1% of the vote that were suppressed. Both candidates right now did not have a primary. They both are the candidates. So I think that we have to look at Bezos owning Washington Post. We have to look at Elon owning X. And I think that's what we should be kind of concerned about, is this disinformation and convincing everyone that one side of the story is real and the other side is your enemy. So hopefully, I like to talk to my friends. I like to read 5 different points of view. I really challenge everyone to find people who don't believe in what you believe in and talk to them. So maybe we can all come closer together.
That would be an environment that likely had more trust, right, than the one we currently live in. Can I go back to climate change and kind of global, maybe even global economic governance, right? Do we, which, again, somewhat inspired by what you said, Nirvikar, the global economic governance, which did change after the Second World War and evolved through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the aughts, feels a little tattered and in disarray to me. Do we imagine that there's some way to reimagine some aspects of global economic governance in order to be able to come together to address climate change? Or is that just some naive idealism on my part? And that any progress we might make on climate change is not going to come from some togetherness that we manage to engineer in a governance kind of way, and will come, I don't know, maybe instead from business. Anyone want to take that up?
Maybe I can give some positive sign.
I love that.
It actually has to do with India providing some intellectual leadership, because India, when India hosted had the presidency of the G20,
Yes.
it actually commissioned a study of the role of multilateral development banks in funding both responses to climate change and sustainable development goals more generally. And they produced a couple of volumes, which, some of it is just like, good intentions, but there are some concrete goals there in terms of increasing the funding by multilateral banks of investment globally to deal with these issues. And the idea is that, they can only do a fraction of what is necessary, but they can, be the lead investors and catalyze further investment. So there is that, those institutions which were created in 1944, which are being reimagined to deal with the climate issue. And so that's something positive.
Sanjay?
When we started this session this afternoon, Galina mentioned something about climate change and whether we are going to, and my question is, are we going to share technology with different countries, right? And my belief is the politicians will not allow it, or corporations will not allow it, because things need to be done all over the world, and they need to be done on a very large scale. And if I say that, no, I'm the designer and I want to have world domination, that's not going to work.
Right, it's not going to work.
Right. So if we are ready to share technology, if we are ready to work together, I think that would be possible.
And I think with how much energy, just a chat GPT takes, right? One query takes as much as one glass of water or 18 light bulbs for an hour, right? One query. And you think about millions of those and how much energy is going to be needed. It's insane how much more energy we're going to use and how more secretive we're going to get. So it's going to be very interesting. And Bitcoin's another thing, right? So you're talking about like global coming together, a global currency, which everyone, a lot of the governments don't want to have happen. But all this relies on a ton of energy and a ton of polluting and a ton of resources that we're burning up. So I agree with you completely. Like it's such an arms race right now. Energy is the arms race.
I think, we're sitting in a country that probably caused more climate damage than any other country in the planet. And now, of course, we want the third world to fix themselves. But I think there's, and Dr. Singh talked about inequality. I think if you look at it, the world, it's such an unfair place that it is just shocking. 4.5% of the world lives in this country, and we have 25% of the world's GDP and 30% of the world's wealth. And the US stock market, public equities, 4,000 shares, 4,000 companies are worth 60% of all of the public company stock market in the world. And if you just keep going up, the unfairness becomes even crazier. So the top 10 richest countries in the world, highest GDP, outside of US and outside of India and China, population's 1 billion, but they have 80% of the world's GDP. And I think if we want the world to grow, and I think if we want the world to become a fair place, there is a blue ocean out there that can grow at 4, 5, 6, 7%. But we need to pay attention to this blue ocean. Enough selfishness by the rich, and maybe they not to be blamed because they were smart enough to get it, and maybe the rest of us are not being as smart, so maybe we just need to get smart. But if you look at it, there's 192 countries in the world, population's 8 billion, and the world economy is $105 trillion. Now, if you divide it, it comes to 17,000 per person per year. So any country that's not at 17,000, India is at 3, any country that's not at 17,000 is being either behind or stupid or not smart enough or needs to go out and
Or
get
just
it.
didn't get there first, right?
Or didn't get it.
Right.
So,
That's all. That's all. Started later.
and the diversity and the inequality is from 140,000 per capita in Qatar to 10 countries in Africa at $1,400 per year per person. So the disparity in the world's 1,400 to 140,000. And if you look at the countries that are below 17,000 per capita per year, that's about 100 countries that have 80% of the world's population, but only 1/3 of the $105 trillion GDP. Earlier, these countries were called poor, underdeveloped, not developed, third world. But fortunately, we have a new word now for it, and it's not that bad. It's called Global South. Okay. So there's 100 countries in Global South, per capita under 17,000. So we just focus on them. And it takes $60 per year to move a person from absolute poverty to poverty. You give $1,000 to a rich person, they're going to go out and buy an NVIDIA stock. You give $1,000 to a poor person, they're going to spend it on bed and food and refrigerator and this and that. And it comes back into the economy in a minute. So if we want to grow at 5% a year, it's very easy. We focus on these 100 countries, the Global South, that have 20% of the world GDP or 30%. If God says to you, I have one wish for you, and in case you meet God before I do, please ask him or her, okay, one wish. Look at every country and look at that country's population and give them the GDP percentage of the world GDP is same percentage as the world population. India is 17% of the world's population. We deserve 17% of the world GDP of $105 trillion, $17 trillion. We're at 5. The reason I say all of this is because magically the number that's being stolen from us is 12 trillion. That's $1 trillion a month that's being stolen by all of our cousins we left behind in India. And we came to this wonderful country. And so it's quite easy. And what do these global South 10 countries or the 100 countries need to do? The same thing that all of the successful people, all the countries have done for the last 300 years. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We guys are good with Microsoft Word, cut, copy, paste, right? So that's all we need to do. What have all of the successful countries in the world in the last 300 years done? The same thing. Diversified economy, education, research, innovation, infrastructure, political stability, law and order, safety net. Did you know the richest country in the world, United States? Did you know that 1 out of 2 people in this country gets a federal handout every month? That's 170 million people getting a federal handout every month. 20 million veterans, 45 million food stamps, 65 million Social Security, 85 million Medicaid, 5 million unemployment, on and on and on. So the point is, even when we get to be the richest country in the planet, one person still has to help another. And women. I bugged him with this stupid question of 900 million people of working age, formal employment with 60 million people. Where are the other 840 million people? So the single largest increase in GDP in the United States between 1950 to 2000 happened because of one factor. Women started working after the pill. In India, out of 900 million people that are eligible to work, 450 million are women. Women participation is 20%. That's 360 million women that are not contributing to GDP. And so that's the biggest thing,
Well,
get the women involved.
I don't disagree with you on that one.
No, I agree with it, but I may contest that these are simple things to do. I suspect that
certainly so.
That perhaps therein lies the conundrum. We can dispute numbers later on. Erica, I'm the chairperson of ICRIER, which was a secretariat behind that. So we fool around with economic numbers all the time. So the labor force participation, et cetera, all these numbers are, as you said, it's hard to decide what is correct. But having said that, there is no question that there is a failure of capitalism as such, a perceived failure of capitalism that is going through and making people rethink how it works. There's a very good book written by Richard Sharma on this, and it's worth reading. Perhaps some of you have read it. And what he says is interesting. And he says what we need is less governance. It's actually more governance that has stifled everything. There's too much governance. There's too many government legislation policies, industrial policy. The role of industrial policy versus trade policy, overtaking industrial policy, beginning to overtake trade policy in a way that is could be very destructive. So I think there are many areas like that we can work on. Having said that, to me, the real power of growth has to be some of the efforts behind global mobility, some of the efforts behind startups working across the world. There are overall reaching phenomena that I don't think we have seen earlier. COVID was one of them. No visas required, no borders required. It goes everywhere. Artificial intelligence is another one. We can talk about regulation in one country versus the other, but the fact is if the whole world doesn't get together to regulate it appropriately, it won't matter, because what you can say in Europe or America actually could be undone somewhere else. I think that's going to be a case in point. And I hope that there won't be many others which will go across the board and really destroy the earlier trade agreements that we have, and the way we think about regulating trade is going to change dramatically with the advent of such such trends that cut across all countries at one time. How do we come to it? Climate change is clearly one of them, right? It just goes across. It doesn't know any borders. And so the need to come together is so critical, and yet we seem to be tearing it apart at the same time.
Can I ask a question about jobs? Because there's been this element here about jobs, and it's particularly appealing to me because I'm a labor economist. And this question is really coming to me a bit on the fly, but there's been a theme here of much of global economic inequality, right, is related to, right, the absence of jobs or the absence of work, or, Navneet, as you just said, cultural restrictions that hold back big swaths of the labor force from joining the labor force in a productive way. That presumes that there will be jobs, right, for people. So I'm wondering, in what I admit is a somewhat ill-specified way, if we could tackle the question of where are the jobs going to be? And Navneet, you could take it up for the global south, but anybody could take it up across the board. As a scholar of job displacement, I certainly, while I acknowledge the enhancing efforts of AI, if we get the displacement effects of this particular technology wrong, well, we've had a lot of history to tell us that we have to pay attention to that. So, I don't know, Sanjay, could I put you on the spot and ask you to muse a bit about jobs and the role of jobs in global economic growth?
Jobs globally?
Yeah, or from whatever perspective you'd like to answer the question.
Okay.
Right? That's
Let
where
me
we've got to be at the end of the
Let me
afternoon.
be provocative then.
Yeah.
You see a lot of migration over here from Africa into Europe. And why is that? Because there's no jobs in those countries. And why, my belief, why are there no jobs? Is it because of something like the Monroe Doctrine, where the US decided that this is my neighborhood, and then it became my market, and therefore those countries' markets were taken over by US companies? And maybe something similar to that has happened in Africa. You don't see that in Southeast Asia so much. China is booming, but no one's moving into China, maybe for different reasons. But the question is, how many more jobs would there have been in the world if Africa made a lot of things themselves and those people could buy other stuff instead of buying it from China or Europe or America or India? And that would have increased the wealth of this world. Mm-hmm. That's my 2 pennies worth.
Okay. Navneet?
Can I ask you a question? Since you are the only labor economist on the panel.
Yes, I opened myself up to that, didn't I? Yeah.
So all other countries in the world largely went from nothing to agriculture, to industrialization, to making stuff, and then to service and consumption, right? Mm-hmm. So US is now 70% of the economy is consumption. So China went through this beautifully and removed 800 million people out of absolute poverty. So is it possible now for a country like India to go from agriculture to consumption and service and skip the industrialization?
Didn't that come up earlier this afternoon, right? Is there this, it's hard to see, right? Even though I don't think we can posit that the kind of manufacturing that we saw historically, right, it is somehow going to come back, right? But I actually am not one who sees that you can just vault over.
What's wrong with everybody gets up in the morning and goes and buys new clothes, and then we go to restaurants and eat, and in the evening go drink, and evening go eat dinner, and go buy a nice bed and sleep, and we go to the mall every day and keep buying and buying, and we keep paying each other. What's wrong with all of this?
Well, in your scenario, there wasn't actually a job, right? You
but there
you
was so
talked
much
about people.
Income
You
from
talked about
nowhere.
us exchanging income, but right? But there's limits to how much we could just exchange currency, right? And then we'd run out of things that one of us needed or one of us could provide, right? So I really do mean it when I said I didn't hear you talk about a job. Maybe you were talking about a universal benefit, right, or some kind of universal income, but then that still has to come from someplace too.
Let me try and attack. So I sit on a committee. I work with the Committee for Services Export out of India, trying to think about how do we increase and significantly increase the export of services from India. It's Ashish Dhawan, who's one of the big philanthropists in India. His committee has done it. And actually, the point that Sanjay made about manufacturing not creating the jobs is absolutely right. It's not going to do that at the level we need. But there are, if we used industrial policy really well, the way China has, and attacked 5 or 6 sectors which could produce jobs, I'll give you a few of them. Tourism. We get half the tourism every year across India than Paris as a city. And yet we have monuments, cities, et cetera, et cetera. The ability to create jobs through that mechanism is enormous. Again, if we focus in on that. Education, sports. Our sporting industry is minuscule compared to what it could be given the size of the country and the interest of the people. As you can see, the IPL thingy has become the richest franchise in the world, almost, I think, at this point in time. It's bigger than the NFL, right? And it's not because it's so exciting. It's because they ain't anything else, right? That's what everybody watches. There is nothing else that we can watch. There's no soccer of that caliber, hockey, et cetera, et cetera. So sports could be huge. Education. The entire area of education is an enormous area. By the way, education out of India, for the rest of the world, education within India, creating teachers, opening schools. I think the government could make huge strides, and that's partially what we're working on.
How about gambling?
They're doing that already. They're doing that already.
Indian
If
casinos.
you come there and you see, you'll see the TV ads for the amount of gambling they wanted us to do online. It is rampant. It is moving, and it's being backed by some very eminent people who are doing well with it. So and that's where I come out with this global mobility thing, which I'm certainly interested in building a new business with, which is the placement of highly trained, skilled Indians in countries which desperately need healthcare workers, for instance. You can see the UK. It takes you 8 months to get an NHS appointment, or an ordinary appointment. They desperately, you need it in America, by the way. America has the biggest shortage of healthcare workers. So I think there are games like that, there are areas like that, which if we really go after, we could change. And that's the best way I can think of solving this job problem that we have.
Yeah, there's, I think, 3 million shortage of nurses, and I'm working with a company that's routing through Philippines to Australia to here, but why not India? I think I might be the only one here born here. I've never lived in India. I do have 100 employees there that we employ, and I go, and I don't know, you guys might be able to help me with this. A lot of my friends are Americans, and I always brag, we are the smartest people in this country, we're the highest earning race in this country. We earn a ton of money in America. We pay the most taxes. Our per capita taxes we pay in America as Indians is the highest, least amount in the jails. We're fantastic for this country. When I go to India, I see my team and I tell them, guys, like I told them 5 years ago, AI is coming. Can you start thinking, think the next level. Go further than just doing a job. I don't know if this is something India as a country, to me, when I visit, is a bunch of the incredible haves, a bunch more that are incredibly rich, and a lot of people that are just don't have it much or barely hanging on. How do we get those people hope and to have them understand they are incredibly smart, incredibly powerful human beings that can do all the things that are being done everywhere else in the world?
I That's the 800 million he's talking about.
That is his 800 million.
No, we'll do it offline. Very good answer.
Okay. Nirvikar,
So,
please.
just to be a little bit pedantic, I mean, there are hundreds of millions of jobs in India, unfortunately, because the unemployment rate is 6%, 8%, but they're very low productivity jobs.
That's right.
And so one of the pieces of the solution, of course, is skilling.
Skilling.
And I just wanted to mention on a kind of concrete positive note that is actually one part of the Indo-Pacific economic framework is paying attention to skilling. And, they have some numbers which, one has to look at the numbers to see did people really get the skills. But I just wanted to mention that because it didn't come up in the Consul General's presentation.
Yes, no, thank you for that.
So skilling is very important. And even in the US, I think that's been one of the problems, right? It came out, I think, in your earlier research too, is that people aren't able to get new jobs because they no longer have the right skills when you have a change in the economy. And in India, people never had the right skills. So they're getting skills at taking exams for getting government jobs, but not for more productive activities.
Right, and that's the place, right, early in life, right, that skilling has the biggest return, right? And so there's this heightened sense that that's the place where you really want to get it right? And agreed. Well, I was just given the warning sign that we need to wind down. Any last comments from my distinguished panel here? Because otherwise I think we'll wrap it up.
I'd like to
Yeah,
give my time to you.
Well, Sanjay, would you like to?
I think, at the end of the, sorry.
Mike.
I thought I was just talking to you.
Yeah,
At
that
the-
would be lovely.
At the end of the day, I think somehow humanity will get through. One way or the other. What was that Winston Churchill said about Americans? Trust the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried out all the
If
alternatives.
they've tried everything else.
So I think the rest of the world is just like that. I mean,
Well, we do have to keep trying. Anyone else, please?
I would say, I hope politics reverts to some norm soon, or the election process in countries reverts to some norm soon. Now we recognize the danger of social media and the conflicting information that is out there, disinformation that is out there. And I think if we can do that, then we have a solution for many problems. I do think industry, by the way, there has been no real shift in US-China trade. Despite all the rhetoric, all the noise, if you look at the numbers, no real shift. Why? Because industry needs to get on with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the plus point I always
That
see.
is the plus point.
Money over emotions.
The best thing about United States is that it doesn't matter who the president is. The president literally has no power. Trump, all the drama of 4 years from 16 to 20. It did not matter to any one of you. Your life didn't change one iota. You got free entertainment every morning. We don't get that anymore.
So,
Yeah, and
Navneet, do you want that?
yes, because the president of the United States has no power. Literally, that's the beauty of the country. Everything that matters to the human beings, trash, water, electricity, fire, police, roads, schools, parks, is all in the hands of 39,000 people. Do you know who these 39,000 are? There's 19,500 cities in the United States. Every city has a mayor, and every city has a CEO known as city manager. These 39,000 people run the country. If you look at the US Constitution, it's one sentence. We give you defense monetary policy and the fighting between the states. Everything else to the 50 states. And look at India's constitution. Nothing to the states, everything in New Delhi, one person will run the country. So
I think on that we may end, because I think we'll duke it out at the reception. Thank you very much.